I've known my brother Daniel to be a charmer since our early teens. People always said he had a smile that could melt hearts, and he took full advantage of that. I never imagined, though, that this charm would turn on me. Growing up, we were tight. We'd go to baseball games, spend weekends gaming, and share inside jokes only siblings understand. But as time went on, subtle lines formed in our relationship. I noticed him getting overly competitive, especially when it came to girls. Back then, I wrote it off as typical sibling rivalry. Now I realize I was ignoring warning signs. In high school, I met Jess, who would later become my wife. She was quiet, funny, and unlike anyone I'd ever known. We started dating when we were seniors, and I felt an instant bond with her. Daniel was a junior at the time. Although he didn't make a huge show of it, I spotted little hints of jealousy whenever Jess was around. He'd try to make jokes that put me on the spot, or he'd brag about how many girls liked him. He'd ask Jess odd questions about her interests, as if he wanted to gauge her taste in guys. At first, I dismissed it. After all, siblings can be weird, and Daniel was still young. But as the years progressed, those small moments became bigger. There was the time he asked Jess to help him pick out a present for a girl he claimed to be seeing. Then there was the time I found random texts from him on her phone at odd hours. Still, Jess swore nothing was happening behind my back. She chalked it up to Daniel's flirty nature. For my sanity, I convinced myself it was harmless, though my instincts told me to watch out. After we all graduated, Jess and I stuck together through college. Daniel went to a nearby university. Whenever we visited home, he seemed thrilled to see Jess. He acted like it was just friendly excitement, but there was a certain intensity in his eyes I couldn't ignore. Still, I believed Jess was committed to me, and Daniel, while annoying, was my brother. I didn't want to stir up conflict without concrete evidence. I knew she wasn't interested in him, so I reasoned that as long as she stayed faithful, nothing else mattered. I proposed to Jess during our final year of college, and she said yes. It was the happiest moment of my life. My parents were thrilled, and our friends congratulated us nonstop. Daniel didn't share that same enthusiasm. He said all the right words, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. During the engagement party, he stayed close to Jess, almost hovering. When I caught him staring at her once, he looked away immediately, like he'd been caught in a private moment. I tried not to think too hard about it, telling myself that it was just my imagination. Over the next few months, wedding plans took over our lives. Jess and I were navigating everything from the guest list to the seating arrangements. My parents insisted we invite the entire family, including second cousins we never saw, and Jess wanted a smaller, more intimate ceremony. We tried to compromise by organizing a moderately sized event with our closest friends and family. My best friend Logan would be my best man, and Daniel would be one of my groomsmen. We had arguments like any engaged couple, but for the most part, things were on track. We were excited. I never guessed my brother was planning something sinister. About 2 months before the wedding, I started hearing rumors that my ex-girlfriend Emily was planning to come. Now, Emily and I had an ugly breakup years ago. She'd been manipulative, jealous, and constantly stirring drama in my life. We parted ways after I found out she'd been lying about just about everything, including money and random affairs she never fully admitted. I hadn't heard from her since graduation, and there was no reason for her to be at my wedding. But rumor said she had an invite. Confused, I asked Jess, and she immediately denied inviting Emily. My parents had no reason to invite her either. The next person on the list was Daniel, but I couldn't figure out why he'd do that. It didn't make sense. He hated Emily, or so I thought. I decided I needed clarity, so I went to Daniel's place and asked him outright. He feigned ignorance, swearing he didn't know what I was talking about. He even acted insulted that I'd suspect him. It left me with no answers and a bad feeling in my gut. Then I started finding evidence in the form of social media messages. Emily had posted a cryptic status referencing a big day in the family. She didn't say names, but she mentioned she was hoping to reconnect with old flames. A mutual friend of ours confirmed Emily was bragging about being invited to a wedding, though she refused to clarify whose. I confronted Daniel again, and he still denied everything. Jess told me to drop it, saying Emily was probably just being her old manipulative self. But I couldn't let it go. Something felt off. 2 weeks before the wedding, I finally got the truth. A friend who worked at a stationery store told me Daniel had placed a special order for invitations. She was the manager and recognized my family name. She said Daniel requested an extra invitation to be printed with the date and location of our wedding, which he picked up in person. I felt my blood boil. He had gone behind my back to invite my ex to my own wedding. That confirmed everything I feared. Daniel wasn't just a flirty nuisance. He was actively trying to sabotage me and Jess. I confronted him the same day. He tried to backtrack, claiming he was only doing it to add drama and excitement to the ceremony, that he thought it would be fun for old high school friends to show up. When I demanded he call Emily and disinvite her, he shrugged. He said it was done and that she deserved closure or some nonsense like that. I realized then this wasn't just about grudges. He was bringing my manipulative ex into my wedding, knowing full well the damage she could cause. I saw the smug satisfaction in his eyes. He wanted chaos. I told Jess everything, and she was livid, demanding to know why Daniel would do that to us. I had no exact answer except the long-running suspicion he was jealous and held a crush on her. Maybe he hoped the appearance of my ex would stir enough drama to derail the wedding. Jess and I decided not to let him succeed. We informed security that Emily was banned. We told them to watch for anyone not on the guest list. We weren't about to let Daniel ruin our day. This was our wedding, and we would stand united against his schemes. On the wedding day, I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting Emily to show up uninvited. Daniel arrived early, wearing a cocky grin and acting like everything was normal. My best friend Logan rolled his eyes at the fake display. Jess looked gorgeous, and I focused on her, refusing to let my brother's schemes overshadow our happiness. During the ceremony, I spotted Emily slipping in near the back. My heart sank, but I squeezed Jess's hand and kept going. Daniel smirked, clearly proud of his work. I vowed not to let them win. Jess deserved better, and so did I. We exchanged vows amid murmurs from guests who noticed Emily's sudden appearance. Still, the officiant pronounced us husband and wife, and we shared our first kiss as a married couple. The applause felt surreal. We walked back up the aisle, and that's when Emily emerged from the crowd, trying to corner me. Logan and another groomsman stepped in, blocking her. She shouted something about wanting closure, but they led her away before she could start a scene. Daniel watched with a smug grin. Jess glared at him, but we held our ground. It was our moment, and we refused to surrender. Later, during the reception, Emily tried to slip back in. Security caught her at the entrance and told her to leave. She made a dramatic fuss, saying she had a right to speak with me, but they weren't having it. Jess and I got updates from Logan, who watched the whole scene unfold. Daniel pretended ignorance, shrugging whenever anyone questioned him. He avoided me most of the night, probably knowing I was furious. Despite the drama, Jess and I danced, toasted, cut the cake, and tried to salvage our night. We refused to let him take this away from us completely. In the days that followed, rage simmered inside me. Daniel crossed a line I never imagined. I realized I had more leverage than I thought. He had a pregnant girlfriend, Becca, who was close to her due date. I knew he was cheating on her because I'd caught him in lies before. I also heard rumors from mutual friends that he went out clubbing and met random women. Becca believed he was devoted. If he wanted to destroy my marriage, I had every reason to expose his hypocrisy and set Becca free. He deserved payback, and I wasn't going to forgive. I started gathering evidence. My friend Logan worked at a bar Daniel frequented. He confirmed Daniel was there with different women almost weekly, openly flirting. I scoured social media and found posts of Daniel bragging about his wild nights, though he never mentioned Becca. I compiled screenshots and testimonies. I even discovered private messages on a shared family computer he'd forgotten to log out of. They revealed explicit conversations with multiple women. My anger only grew, but I stayed methodical. If I was doing this, I wanted it to be undeniable. I would confront him through Becca and expose the truth. I felt a twinge of guilt because Becca was innocent in this. She deserved better than a cheating partner, but part of me also worried about stressing her out so late in her pregnancy. Still, I remembered the betrayal at my wedding, how Daniel smirked while Emily tried to ruin our vows. I pushed past any hesitation. If he could sabotage my life during one of my biggest moments, I had no obligation to protect his secrets. Becca deserved the truth, and I deserved retribution. No forgiveness for him, only a reckoning that matched the pain he caused. I steeled myself. A week after the wedding, I dropped by the apartment Daniel shared with Becca. He wasn't home, so she let me in, happily chatting about how excited they were for the baby. My anger flared just hearing her talk so lovingly about him. She offered me tea. I refused politely, then sat her down and explained that I had something important to show her. Confusion flickered across her face as I pulled out my phone, opening the folder of screenshots. One by one, I presented Daniel's infidelity. She paled. Tears welled, and she silently scrolled. I felt no pleasure, grim resolve. Becca started crying, quietly at first, then harder until she was sobbing uncontrollably. I placed a hand on her shoulder, feeling terrible for bringing her that pain, but also convinced she needed to know. She asked me why I was doing this, so I told her about Daniel's sabotage of my wedding and his history of lying. She shook her head, stunned by the betrayal. Then she began thanking me for being honest, saying she would rather face the truth now than live in denial. I offered to help her however I could, but she said she needed time alone first. I left the apartment feeling a twisted mix of triumph and pity. Daniel deserved this. He had toyed with my marriage and never thought twice about Becca's well-being. Now his facade was shattered. That evening, he called me, cursing and demanding to know what I'd done. He spewed insults, accusing me of ruining his family. I reminded him he ruined mine first. He claimed it was a harmless joke, that Emily was never a real threat. I didn't bother responding to his lame excuses. He raged on, blaming me for everything. I hung up, content that my revenge had struck home. Over the next few days, my parents got involved. They begged me to reconcile with Daniel, arguing that family mattered more than grudges. I refused. I told them what he did at my wedding, how he continued lying, and how he didn't care about Becca. They were horrified, but hoped I'd let it go for the baby's sake. Jess and I discussed it. We agreed Daniel was toxic. We wouldn't let him near us unless he owned his actions and apologized. My parents asked me to be patient, but I wouldn't budge. I refused to enable him anymore. He'd earned it. Meanwhile, Becca moved out of the apartment, staying with her sister. She texted me to say she planned on getting a paternity test once the baby arrived, though she was fairly sure Daniel was the father. She told me she couldn't trust him anymore and didn't want to raise a child in that environment. Daniel called me, ranting that I'd destroyed his life, but I felt no remorse. He made his choices, and I merely illuminated them. Jess backed me up, reminding me that he had nearly ruined our wedding. Now he was facing the aftermath. It was his fault. Jess and I focused on each other, trying to move past the wedding fiasco. We visited friends, took a honeymoon, and started building our life together. Occasionally, I'd get updates about Daniel from family. He was spiraling, partying even more, blaming me for Becca's departure. Nobody bought his excuses. My parents were disappointed but tried to remain neutral, hoping time would heal things. I never forgot the hurt he caused, and I maintained my stance. I wouldn't forgive him unless he acknowledged everything. Months passed, and he remained stubbornly unapologetic. I felt justified in my revenge, refusing to back down. Several months later, Becca gave birth to a healthy baby boy. She allowed Daniel to see the baby, but she refused to reconcile. She told me Daniel kept begging her for another chance, promising he'd change. From what I heard, he still spent nights out with random women, so I doubted his sincerity. Becca kept me updated, thanking me again for exposing him. She admitted she was heartbroken, but glad she discovered his true character before marrying him. I admired her strength. She deserved happiness, and Daniel didn't deserve her loyalty. I stayed civil when I saw him at family gatherings. My parents tried one last time to mediate a truce. They invited both me and Daniel to dinner, hoping we'd bury the hatchet. Jess agreed to come only if Daniel apologized first. He refused to apologize or admit wrongdoing. At dinner, we barely spoke. He glared at me across the table, calling me petty under his breath. I reminded him of the wedding. He shrugged, insisting again it was a joke. Jess bristled, telling him he had no concept of loyalty. The night ended with an awkward silence. My parents looked defeated, but I felt no shame. He asked for this. After that, I cut all contact except for obligatory family functions. Daniel occasionally texted me rants about how I ruined his life, calling me vindictive. I blocked him. Jess and I were determined to live in peace. We built a happy home together. untainted by Daniel's nonsense. Meanwhile, Becca pressed for custody arrangements and child support. Daniel complained to anyone who would listen that she was being unreasonable. Nobody believed him anymore. He'd lost all credibility. I heard rumors he was still sleeping around, drowning in self-pity. I felt no regret. If he wanted revenge, he'd have to keep waiting. As time passed, I came to terms with losing the brother I thought I had. In truth, he was never the loyal sibling I hoped for. Looking back, I saw the warning signs, his competition, his jealousy over Jess, his manipulative streak. His betrayal at the wedding was just the final push. I found solace in Jess, who reminded me that our marriage was stronger than ever. We defied his sabotage, and I showed him I wouldn't be trampled. The revenge tasted bittersweet, but it was necessary. I refused to regret my actions. He forced my hand, and I played it. Occasionally, I ponder whether I should have stopped at warning Daniel instead of going straight to Becca. But then I remember his smug face at my wedding, the way he intentionally inflicted pain on Jess and me. He crossed that line without remorse. I owed him nothing. By exposing his cheating, I ensured Becca wouldn't be trapped with a liar. She found the courage to leave, which he deserved. He lost his girlfriend, his credibility, and any chance of controlling my life again. Jess stands by my choice, reminding me we can't save everyone. Some people need a harsh lesson first. That's the whole story. My brother tried to sabotage my wedding, so I destroyed his relationship by telling his pregnant girlfriend about his affairs. He never apologized or showed remorse, and I never forgave him. Jess and I remain happily married, our bond stronger for having survived his betrayal. Becca is free from his lies, raising her child in a healthier environment. Daniel still resents me, but that's not my concern. He dug his own grave. Sometimes revenge is the only way to make a betrayer understand the damage they've done. I stand by every choice. My conscience is clear,